I couldn't get the thought out of my mind. Back home, I read everything about angels that I could get my hands on. Joan Wester Anderson, author of Where Angels Walk, began her own research after personally experiencing a supernatural rescue.
Being a person who was strongly spiritual, I had no bias against angels. It was just that I never really thought of them as getting involved in Earth to the extent that I later learned they do. It was kind of a nice thought, but not anything specific to me. I felt if you're going to pray, you just go right to God. You don't need all the rest of this stuff kind of hanging around. And then my son Tim, who at the time was 21 years old, had an experience that kind of changed all that for me. He was coming from Connecticut to Chicago to be with us at Christmas. And of course my husband had called the boys a few days before the journey began to say, don't come because the Midwest is going through this terrible temperature drop. The interstates were being closed because this high wind was blowing the snow and it was very dangerous. And of course the kids kind of laughed. Well, weather warnings are for old people. You know, we're 21 years old, we're invincible, we can get through the mountains with no problem at all. And that's what they proceeded to do, except they broke down outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, on one of these deserted access roads, 32 degrees below zero, the middle of the night, and they just sat on the side of the road with no place to run, no lights in the distance, and realized they were probably going to freeze to death. And then all of a sudden, as Tim described it to me, there was a tow truck there. They saw this flare of light behind them. They hadn't seen this approach. It was just there. The guy got out. He didn't seem real surprised to see them. He hitched them up kind of without talking much, took them to a place of safety in Fort Wayne, and when they got out of the car and turned around to ask him how much the bill would be, there was no truck there. And there were no tracks in the snow leading away from where the boys stood. Now, when Tim told me that, I got goosebumps, and I said, Tim, I need to know what time that man came. And Tim said, well, that I know for sure. He came at 1:45 a.m. because I had just looked at my watch. Well, at 1:45, I had been standing by the front window saying, God, you've got to send someone. You have to send someone to help the kids. It's Christmas. God, you've got to send someone. I don't normally give God orders, but I was just doing it then with such intensity. That was 1:45. And of course, Tim was still on Eastern Standard Time. So I was left with the realization that at the very moment I had said, God, you have to send someone, God did. But who had God sent? And as a journalist, I knew the ways to research. And of course, I went back over the trail. I called the Highway Patrol. No, they had had no rescue vehicles out. That was before the days of cellular phones, and so they would not have allowed any of their people to cruise the roads because they could have gotten in trouble. I called several tow truck services. They laughed at me. Why would a driver be leaving the safety of town on a bitterly cold and dangerous night? No, they had had no calls. So the trail dried up, as I should have known that it would, because angels don't leave very many calling cards.